So last weekend, I taught a course entitled Peaceful Living, Peaceful Dying. And we looked at how awareness of death can inspire us in our Dharma practice and help us to live wisely and compassionately. So afterwards, one participant sent me a question asking, if dealing with one death can be difficult, what to do with situations like the one of India and so many other countries that don't have vaccines from a Buddhist viewpoint. So I sent her a reply saying that first of all, we do whatever we can on the practical level, like making donations to organizations that are there on the ground helping, and maybe even volunteering if we have the right skills and if that's doable. And also on the spiritual level, we can dedicate the positive energy or merit that we create from doing prayers and meditations and other virtuous actions. So there has been research that shows that prayers, saying prayers for those who are in difficulty, can be effective. And I also said that as Buddhists, we know that such suffering is not really new or unusual. So throughout the history of this planet, human beings have suffered a tremendous amount from wars, famines, droughts, natural disasters, and epidemic diseases. And from the Buddhist point of view, such problems are typical features of samsara, cyclic existence. So as long as we are in this situation of samsara, that means not enlightened, then these problems will occur again and again. So rather than getting stuck in negative feelings like depression and despair, we use our awareness of these problems in our meditation to strengthen our determination to be free of samsara and our altruistic intention to attain enlightenment so we can help all other beings become free of samsara. So that's what I wrote to her, and she wrote back to thank me for my response and said that it was helpful. But she also wrote, what I usually feel is anger, sadness, and fear to see that much suffering. And I think sometimes that it's just too much and unfair. I feel sad when I see and hear all the stories, and I feel there isn't much I can do about it. It's like a nightmare, and we don't seem to be able to wake up. So I was going to respond to her, but then I thought other people might be feeling similar feelings, so I thought I'll do a BBC on it. I had to do one anyway, so this is a good subject, a good topic to talk about. Hopefully it will benefit many people. So I thought to share some tools or methods that I have found helpful to keep my mind afloat in such situations. And by that I mean keeping my mind positive and compassionate rather than drowning in sadness or anger. So one thing that can be helpful is to ask yourself, does it help to feel angry, sad, anxious, depressed? So of course these feelings are natural, and it doesn't help to deny them or just try to run away from them. And also to understand that we don't choose to have these feelings. We didn't choose to feel this way. These feelings just come up in our minds on their own due to many different factors, causes, and conditions that we have no control over. So even though we don't have the choice or control to have these feelings in our mind, we do have a choice about how we deal with them, how we respond to them when they are there in our mind. So on one hand, we can just get caught up in them and even feed them. Not that we do that deliberately, but it's just the way our mind operates. Like we just keep thinking again and again and again in the same old ways. And this usually just perpetuates these emotions, and they may even increase. So that's one thing that we might do. But another thing we could do is to step back and just ask ourselves, is it helpful to think this way? Is it helpful to have these thoughts and feelings in my mind? Do I want to be stuck in them? So it's a bit like when these thoughts and feelings come up in our mind, we are like at a crossroads or a T-junction, call it in some countries. So we have a choice between two different roads we could go down. And the former one, getting stuck in and caught up in those feelings, that might be the easier one to go down because of familiarity, the one we've been going down again and again and again. The latter road, taking a step back and asking, do I want to feel this way or do I want to do something different? So that road may not be so familiar to us or so easy to follow because we're not used to it. But if we try going down that road, we might find that it's much more appealing, much more satisfying, and more effective. And then if we have that experience, we'll naturally want to keep going down that road again and again. And there are definitely tools that we can use to deal with disturbing thoughts and emotions like anger, fear, sadness, and so forth, so that they decrease and even disappear, and our mind can be transformed into a much more positive state. So I really like the verse from Shantideva's text, the Bodhicharyavatara, Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, that talks about how if there's something you can do about a problem, do it. But if there's nothing that you can do, better to accept it. So whether the problem is something we ourselves are going through or it's a bigger problem in the world around us, we can ask ourselves, is there something I can do? Is there a remedy? And if there is something we can do, or at least try to do, better to put our energy into that. But in some cases, there may be nothing that can be done. And in that case, it's better to accept the situation. We can always do things on the level of our own thoughts and feelings. Even if we can't change the external situation, we can change our internal situation, the way we look at it. So I feel there's always something we can do, and it's better to put our energy into doing something useful rather than just feeling bad and letting our mind go around and around in unhappy thoughts, which actually just make things worse. So check that out. Try that out. And then some other things that can be helpful in dealing with situations like what we're facing now with all these people suffering from COVID and not always able to find the remedies that they need. So from the Buddhist point of view, we say that suffering or dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, is just a natural part of life. Buddha spoke about this in his very first teaching. And I think one reason we get upset about problems or suffering is because of thinking, this shouldn't happen. It's not fair. It has to stop. So in one sense, that's true. I mean, we should try to stop problems. We should do whatever we can to eliminate COVID or hunger, poverty, war, and so on. So we shouldn't just sit back and say, oh, there's nothing that can be done. We should try to stop them. But on the other hand, is it realistic to expect that we can make the world completely free of all problems and all suffering, all negativities forever and ever? So some years ago, I noticed in myself this kind of subtle attitude that said, not that I was doing this consciously or deliberately, but it was just something deep down inside, a kind of feeling like I didn't really want to get out of samsara, maybe partly due to laziness because it takes a lot of effort to get out. Instead, I just wanted to stay in it with the hope that one day everything would be perfect and wonderful. A perfect, fault-free samsara. So is that really possible? Or is it an oxymoron, a contradiction? So when I saw that attitude in myself, I realized, no, that's just unrealistic, incorrect. So we do have to get ourselves out of samsara, and there are ways of doing that. It takes time, it takes effort, but it is possible. So we just can't expect that samsara will ever be perfect and free of suffering, free of problems. Another thing that helps is to remember impermanence, the changing nature of things. So most of the things in our lives, in the world, are impermanent. They're subject to change and destruction. They will go out of existence. So you can check this yourself. If you think about some problem you had in the past or a problem that existed in the world and ask, is it still there? Maybe not. And even while the problem is there, if you check carefully, you can see that it changes. There's fluxes coming and going. It's not always exactly the same. Unfortunately, sometimes things get worse before they get better. And that's what some people are saying about the situation in India, that it might get worse. But on the other hand, supplies of oxygen, medicine, vaccines are being sent. People are trying to do something about it. So it's just a matter of time before the situation will improve. So it's really important to keep up a feeling of hope and not fall into despair, which becomes like paralyzing, not helpful at all. And it's also helpful to look for positive things. The media tends to focus on all the bad news. Maybe that's what people prefer to hear about, and don't cover so much the good news, but it is there. I heard about a Sikh temple in Delhi or somewhere around Delhi that was giving out free oxygen. They had oxygen and they said, anybody who needs it, come here, we'll give it to you. And I've heard of many other acts of kindness and goodness, people just giving away medicine, food, oxygen, what is needed. So if we do pay attention to the good news, the acts of kindness and goodness, they are there, and that can help us to stay positive rather than get overwhelmed by despair. And finally, something we can do is to use the situation to cultivate compassion, to do practices that will increase empathy, compassion, altruism, and so on. And one practice that's very helpful for that is the practice of Tonglen. So I thought maybe we could just spend the last couple of minutes of this talk doing some Tonglen practice. So the practice of Tonglen, if you're not familiar with it, means taking and giving. So you imagine taking the suffering of others, and when we take it, we don't just get filled up with suffering, but rather we imagine this suffering that we're taking in overcoming our ego, our egoism, our ego-centered attitude, our self-centered attitude. So that gets overcome, eliminated, and then we imagine all our positive energy, good karma, virtue, and so on. We send that out to others to relieve their suffering. So even just doing that for a couple of minutes can bring about a transformation in our mind, and there's a good chance that it will bring about a transformation in others as well. So sit quietly. You can close your eyes and think about the suffering of others according to what you're able to open your heart to. You can imagine all the suffering of all beings or just a limited amount of suffering. Even just one person's suffering, one being's suffering. And feel how wonderful it would be if that person or those beings could be free of their suffering. And imagine that suffering taking the form of smoke or fog. And as you inhale, imagine breathing it in. So it leaves the other person. They become free of it. You breathe it in. And imagine that it comes to your heart where the self-centered, ego-centered attitude resides. And this fog or smoke absorbs into the self-centered attitude and makes it disappear. It becomes non-existent. So does the suffering that you take in. all that negative energy disappears, becomes non-existent. Think of all your good energy, your positive energy, your good karma, your virtue, your good qualities, all the good things you have in your life. Imagine that in the form of bright light. And imagine sending that out and going to the person or beings that you're thinking of, going into them, into their minds and hearts, and filling them with this positive energy, bringing about peace, happiness, positive thoughts, feelings in their minds, helping them develop their potential for enlightenment and all the good qualities that go along with that: love, compassion, wisdom, and so on. So this is a fairly simple practice that we can do when we're feeling sad or frightened or unhappy about problems. And it can help to bring about a change in our own minds and a change in the environment around us. So there is something that we can do about suffering. Thank you.